Well, good afternoon and welcome to METV. I'm very pleased to have got our brothers from across the ditch to join us for a webinar today to look at coronavirus and how it's affecting us in both countries. You all know our President, Mr. John Horan. Give us a wave, John. And our National Chair, Mr. Tony Arnold. Give us a wave, Tony. We can see from your background there. Welcome, guys. Thanks for joining us. And I'll hand over to Bernie McLaughlin, the CEO of Master Electricians New Zealand, to introduce his presidents. Bernie, how are you?
Yeah, we're pretty good across the ditch. Thanks, Mel. It's a great opportunity just to be able to touch base to see how we're going and see how it compares to you guys over there. So with me, I've got Ross Beal, our chairman of the board.
Hi, team.
And we've got Alistair G, who's our national president.
Afternoon.
So Ross has been, he's had a place in the organisation for the last 35 years, actually. He's been a president. He's been pretty much in every facet of our, especially our trade education industry for quite some time. So it's good to have Ross and his historic view of where we've come from. Alistair G's he's in his last term of presidents this year, so he's also a member of the board.
Fantastic. Bernie, do you want to give us an update on where New Zealand's up to with coronavirus and the basics of the stimulus package currently on offer?
So the current situation is that we basically came within a day of eradicating coronavirus from New Zealand. We've had some pretty, some might say, draconian measures put in place to shut the place down. Effectively, for about 5 weeks, the only thing that was open was service stations, supermarkets and surgeries. That was it. It's a pretty dark day, I think, for a lot of people when the McDonald's drive-through shuts. But we've literally had absolutely no industry working in any part of the country for quite some time. No food, no delivery food. It was nothing. So it's been quite heavy measures. Even construction was shut down, which I understand was not the case for you guys. So we've really been living in our bubble, as we've been calling it, for quite some time, with only immediate family that we've been able to liaise with. I guess the drastic measures are an indication of the drastic nature of the care package that's been rolled out over the last 6 weeks. So we've just had millions and millions of dollars being pushed to all parts of all industries. So construction, we've just found out in the last few weeks that we've had some more stimulus packages pushed towards something that we've actually been striving for quite some time, even pre-COVID, was the subsidising of employers to train. It's a big part of what we think is critical and missing in our industry. So at least if there is a silver lining, it's actually stimulated some employers to hopefully keep training and train more. So we've had some pretty drastic measures, but equally we've had some pretty drastic support packages come from government.
Bernie, so just for my knowledge, in the middle of that total lockdown, if you ran out of food, could you go to the supermarket and buy some more? You had to get it home delivered.
You could only go to the supermarket if you weren't in the high risk areas, in the high risk. So anyone that had immune compromised couldn't go. But yes, supermarkets were open, but there were some pretty strict measures about only admitting a certain amount of people. They had one-way systems down aisles, and huge queues outside every supermarket. So it was, even just going to the supermarket was quite a trial.
Right, okay. Well, just from the Australian side, I understand we've got our last 3 cases in ICU. There's only 16 people left in hospital at this stage. From 1.8 million tests, 0.4% have been positive during that time. And we've unfortunately had 102 deaths from our 25 million population. We obviously didn't lock down anywhere as hard. Business, we actively lobbied government for a good month there around keeping the electrical industry as an essential service and keep it operating. And I think our federal government recognised that and kept a lot of essential businesses running through that time, which helped our economy a lot. We're now in phase 2 of easing the restrictions. Within a few weeks, we should be up to phase 3 of easing those restrictions, which won't be too far off being back to normal. We're even going to have 2,000 people at our sporting events in Queensland this weekend, and in other states by the 1st of July. We're allowed to have up to 25% of a normal capacity crowd attend a rugby league game. We'll actually be above what they normally get to a rugby league game, so that'll be interesting to see if they can fill the stadiums there. In response to coming out of this, there's obviously a huge stimulus package and a lot of acronyms. We've got Job Seeker, which is the old dole being doubled, JobKeeper, which 71% of our members are accessing JobKeeper till September, which is a great support to keep them going. Concerns after September, what will happen then? We've got Job Maker, which is a heap of infrastructure projects being kick-started. We've got a home builder package, great incentives for building a new home, combined with state incentives can actually add up to quite a bit. Very controversial early release of super and millions of dollars out of super funds going into the marketplace, and some boosting cash flow packages and some apprenticeship support. That's all from the federal government. Then I won't run through the 8 different states and territories because there's a whole lot of other complementary packages around that. Any members want to see more of those sorts of stimulus, there is a great summary in our members area of our webpage, which you can look at, which are really aimed at getting the economy going again. So look, I think it's time Bernie, you and I sit back and lean on the expertise of the 4 people we have here, although I'm a bit concerned we've lost Alistair quickly. I don't know if we can get him back or we can pull some magic and slide him in there beside you, but while he's disappeared, I'll start with Ross. And Ross, you live in one of the most beautiful places in the world. We're obviously planning a conference there in September, which has been put off for probably a year, not locked down yet. And with such a beautiful place, totally reliant on tourism, how has Queenstown and other tourist destinations fared through this lockdown?
Yeah, well, for those of you that are looking in that know Queenstown, it's one of the more panoramic parts of the country. It's the adventure capital of the world, in our view. Has a permanent population of about 38,000, but it provides about 150,000 bed nights typically, and so there's 150,000 spare beds available right now. The impact on this region has been absolutely dramatic. I think tourism, hospitality, support services are pretty much decimated. B&B, Airbnb activity has died out significantly, and some of those Airbnbs are now endeavouring to turn them into long-term rentals so that they can get some income re-established. We've got a ski season opening in about a week's time, which clearly will be only domestic, and so we'll miss you Aussies, purging our cafes and bars. So you'll have to go to Thredbo this year, and I hope it snows pretty well in Thredbo. One of the real impacts here actually is on foreign tourists who have work visas, and a significant amount of the tourist industry in Queenstown and Arrowtown is supported by young people from around the world who are working their passage, as it were, and have work visas. And we've got about 6,000 unemployed in the region right now as a result. And there's been a struggle to supply financial aid to them because they're not Kiwi citizens, and so don't quite naturally line up for support. Once you've been made redundant, you've been made redundant, and the opportunity for work right now is pretty sparse. If you want to buy a rental car, we can do a deal. There's probably 5,000 vehicles and camper vans parked at the back of the airport. So a lot of those have been sold. There's 2 or 3 companies who are Chinese-based who support the Chinese market particularly, and they're just selling their assets. So that doesn't bode well. I suspect that suggests that they don't see the Chinese market returning anytime soon. So yes, it's a pretty dire place, really. If you'd run your conference in September, had you been able to cross the border, I reckon you would have done it a bit cheaper than you were originally planning to right now.
Yeah.
So, yeah, difficult time, Mel. Absolutely. But, you know, we haven't dealt with it like the Australians have. We've had a complete health response with very little, I believe, very little consideration to the financial and economic impact that that response would bring. So I think we've got a long haul back.
You're right, and just for your knowledge, our conversations with your hotels and events staff there around potentially holding our conference a year later is very, very different to our initial conversations where you're fighting to get a time slot and enough rooms to house a conference. Now it's both arms wide open and the price is dropping and come on down, we need you. So it's very pleasing to have a bit of buyer power in that relationship. Alistair, if I can flick over to you for a minute, you're much more in the industrial environment. What has this total shutdown meant to someone who's got major projects on the go?
Well, basically, we're all in uncharted territory. It's been a constantly evolving situation, with some benefiting, some businesses really hurting. What's relevant today may be a totally different kettle of fish next week. Just look how quickly this has snuck up on us all. It's been a lottery depending on what work areas you're strong in. So industrial is basically split into your two sectors, being contracting and servicing. Contracting obviously took a hit over the lockdown and has been slow to restart. Confidence has taken a knock, and it's only those with deep pockets right now, or those that were committed to a project before lockdown, that have opened their wallets since. There are a lot of projects waiting in the wings, but they're taking a long time to come back on and come back to fruition. The government's fast tracking of shovel-ready projects will go some way to stimulate the economy, but a lot of these are civil, roading type projects with not that much electrical content, and even if the sub-trades are involved, it takes a long time from when the ground's first scratched to when cables are first pulled. I've been advised, however, that the consultants are busy again designing jobs, so that's a good sign. And word on the street is that pricing design's picking up significantly, and that will inevitably turn into work. One issue we've got is contracting margins over here in the electrical industry were tight before COVID-19. And now with everyone trying to keep employees busy, this is only going to get worse until the projects start to flow more freely. Industrial servicing work, on the other hand, has been the saviour for many industrial businesses that have a servicing arm. A lot of industrial work is in the primary industry sector, such as food, dairy and beverage manufacturing. With all these industries being classed as essential services during the lockdown, they were permitted to continue and operate under, albeit strict conditions. This has meant that businesses involved in this industry have generally fared better than those that are not. I do see that the primary sectors with private funding will continue to provide ongoing work for contracting and servicing, and will be an immense strength in the economy's recovery. We've already seen a significant amount of designs in relation to new processing facilities in the primary sectors since shutdown, which underway will provide a lot more stability to the industry.
I think, Tony, you're in a similar industry to Alistair in a certain way, with a little bit of switchboard building. I watched your webinar the other day, and you were saying that some sectors have actually done quite well. So, I mean, we're looking at some sort of short-term bounce back that is pretty solid, and there's a little bit of a hole in the pipeline coming up. But how are you guys faring, well, particularly for you, in the short and long term?
Yeah, look, Bernie, it's been really interesting for us, and probably very similar to Alistair, where we've got some good ongoing service contracts with some of the big miners. And that one of our big clients required us to have 15 blokes on site for 3 months without the ability for them to come home. So that really underpinned our industrial service business. Whilst it was a tough gig for the guys to stay away for so long, I think in general we advised them that we didn't know what the market was going to be like domestically, around the commercial market. So better to stay and be in a job than come home and have nothing to come to, sort of thing, So that really stayed up employment for our industrial guys. There is a lot of industrial project work still in the pipeline that will continue. But as Alistair said, you know, the margins in our commercial business are just have absolutely been decimated, and we're probably at the point now where we had a good backlog of work. We haven't been eligible for any of the JobKeeper or any of the what I call the super dole. We haven't been eligible for any of that. So for us as a business, it's been, you know, managing our way through this, knowing that we don't have any government support at all. So we've been really watching our pennies. We've right-sized our business. But yeah, I see, you know, sectors of the market that are really going to suffer are going to be commercial until some element of confidence gets back to investors who are willing to open their wallets and get projects up and going. And it's been difficult for everyone with the share market sort of bouncing the way it has. I think that's will give some investors a bit of confidence that things might come back to normal, you know, quickly. But, you know, I think it's a wait and see type scenario, and we're doing exactly that. You know, we're probably going to see our big hit out of all of this in the July, August months. And I think by the time our business becomes eligible for any sort of support, the support will be gone, you know. So it's a matter of, you know, we're probably lucky we've got a pretty decent sized war chest, and we're sort of ready to lift the lid on that when we have to.
Yeah, it's pretty important to have those resources behind you. And I guess something I heard in your other webinar was the term bounce and pounce, which I thought was quite clever. And I guess, John, the pounce side of it comes from, I guess, diversifying. And if you previously commented that you've been getting into that solar side of things, I guess, to make yourself a bit more diverse. Has that worked out for you, and particularly that investment in that diversification? I guess that's the pounce thing you were referring to.
Look, we've been doing solar for a long time, and is probably the main part of our business. But we were lucky that our tradies were still allowed to work, so they could still install. The sales side of our business I was significantly worried about, just because I didn't realise, you know, if people on JobKeeper or JobSeeker had no confidence to buy solar. That's what I was really worried about. But we were lucky we had a big pipeline in place before COVID hit, and so our installers never really changed. But we had to completely, all our sales people though, we had 50 to 60 people all working from home. So we're used to selling face-to-face with our customers, so we had to become a call center. So we had to reinvent ourselves overnight. And we were just lucky. We realised quickly that people are racking up the biggest power bills of their life because they're all working from home as well. So we went hard. We doubled down on that to really target those people, and a lot of educational stuff to help them how they can be more energy efficient while they are working at home. So yeah, we sell solar, not as much as we did, you know, before COVID, but definitely enough to get through. Super 2-speed economy like you guys are talking about there. We were so lucky that the government didn't close it down like they did in New Zealand. I would hate to fathom, actually, to think about that. I'm never complaining again, by the way. I complained enough about how we had it, but you guys, that's unbelievable what you guys have just had to go through. So yeah, but as Malcolm just said, 71% of our members are on JobKeeper. So I am also nervous about what's going to look like in September, October. I'm loving the stimulus that's coming out. Probably 50% of our members will get that. The others will have to wait a little bit further to get on the bounce on the back of the economy and people spending more money in getting it that way. But no, it's been tough. Yeah.
And can I just question, Tony mentioned that he wasn't subject to stimulus, and was that based on conditions set for your particular type of business, or number of staff, or loss of revenue? What were the conditions around which you would have been able to pick up that support, Tony?
Yeah, Ross, basically it was you had to show that you'd had there was a couple of, there's a raft of compliance measures to get on the JobKeeper allowance, but the primary one when it came out was you had to have a 30% drop in your revenue March to March, basically between March 2000, by comparison months, March 2019 to March 2020. So, you know, I never really thought that was much of a metric because, you know, we know businesses in the market that that had quite a huge March in 2019 and went back to a more normal March in 2020. And I'm talking about substantial businesses with 200 or 300 employees. So they went back to business as usual and are now getting $500,000 a month from the government. Yeah. So we were the absolute polar opposite of that. We had a very soft March 2019, and we were up 40% in 2020.
And that was in North Queensland too, Tony, because we had the devastating floods in North Queensland where it absolutely wiped out the economy. And then we just get over that, and then COVID-19 hits. So it was just double hit. Yep.
It's a double whammy, and you know, there's a range of other measures now, which you know, we've been desperately trying to squeeze into a box, but we always fail. But we'll just wait and see what happens through the July, August months, and see what happens out of that.
Good problem to have, Tony. I just want to pause for a sec and acknowledge a couple of our attendees. We've got a couple of ex-presidents online. Special shout out to Jeff Baldwin. I know Jeff really enjoyed the Kiwi company and some of our conferences we've attended from Australia. And Mike Barr, an ex-president from Kiwiland. A special shout out to you two guys. And maybe you guys want to be the first questions asked. I'll open the floor up as we're continuing this conversation to any members who want to pose a question to any of the panelists. You can simply write the panelist's name and then jot your question down, and I'll ask your questions for you as we head on through. But in the meantime, while you're typing, we'll keep the conversation going. And I'll go back to Alistair, and I'm sure Mike Barr isn't hanging over his shoulder there trying to give him a hard time. I'm sure he's in a separate place in the world. But look, Alistair, we've been through this total lockdown. It's pretty tough. What's industry doing now that things have opened back up again to get back on its feet? What are the key things the average contractor is doing now?
Well, it's been a bit of a mixed bag. Some businesses have moved very quickly to restructure, and others have taken advantage of the various government stimulus packages that we're talking about, such as wage subsidies, or there's low interest loans available. Some businesses know that the type of work that they did is going to take some time to return to some sense of normality. They have restructured to ensure their short to medium term viability while they reset, while others see light at the end of the tunnel probably later in the year. And I feel that if they can make it through the next few difficult months, they will pick up again. I feel that if it wasn't for the government stimulus packages that were put in place, we'd see a lot more jobless right now. But depending on the viability of some of the businesses, these packages may only be delaying the inevitable. I do think that we're going to see some companies go to the wall at some stage. As an organisation, MENZ are committed to supporting their members during these tough times. Business has changed already. We're seeing many businesses continuing to have office staff work from home, which has worked well over the lockdown period. Many are considering whether it's worth actually still having the multi-storey office building housing these people when technology is now available for them to return to work remotely. This does little, however, to assist the commercial landlords or the local coffee shop that supply these workers each day when they're in the likes of the CBD. I'd also say that the likes of Zoom and Microsoft Teams have seen their usage go through the roof. These platforms will see a reduction in face-to-face meetings, which will save costs, but again, do little for the airlines and accommodation providers, and there'll be knock-on effects.
It'd be very interesting how much continues in this Zoom world after COVID's all gone, and it's pretty hard to wire up a switchboard over Zoom. Last time I checked.
True.
Sure, your admin staff can do a bit, but maybe not completely work that way. Ross, you're the National Chair of Master Electricians. During these turbulent times, most members normally lean on their association pretty hard. What's the Master Electricians New Zealand response been helping its members out through this time?
Well, it's certainly been an unprecedented time. New Zealand's never experienced anything of this ilk before. and to find that the bulk of your 1,100 members are locked out of work, sitting at home, needing to determine whether they can be an essential service in support of those essential services that were still open. It was clear to us that we had to lift our communications and control the narrative out to our membership. So our team in Wellington has done a fantastic job, keeping in mind that they've been outside of their office, they've been working from home. So Bernie's had to manage staff working from their own properties, but it was clear that we needed to get a significant amount of communication out to them very, very quickly, which we endeavoured to do, particularly around the criteria around essential service, around the criteria for the wage subsidy, which is not too dissimilar to what Tony described before, with a demonstration of a 30% drop in revenue. We were granted $580 odd per staff member for a period of 12 weeks, but the employers were required to subsidise that salary up to 80% or 100%, with the notion that it was, their best endeavours to be able to do that. So we had to get information out to the team to make sure that we had the legislation right. They understood what was appropriate and applicable and relevant for them. Currently we've got a second small business stimulus package, which was based on $10,000 per company and $1,800 per employee, up to a maximum of 50 employees. So there's effectively 100 grand for a business of 50 people available to support their revenue. And issues like rental on commercial properties, where you have no revenue, you're subsidising wages out of reserves or out of overdraft or out of cash, but you've still got to pay your rent and other fixed costs. So there was a lot of work going into the contracts around rental and commercial property to assist companies to subsidise that to some degree. Our RMs, our regional managers, were working from home, couldn't get out on the road, so they undertook to make phone or Zoom contacts with all of our members, and I think I'm right in saying that they were able to touch base with 96% of our membership. And there was a couple of reasons in doing that. One was to make sure that on a face-to-face way, they were getting the communication and the information that they needed to support them at the time. It was also an opportunity for us to gain some feel for what pain they were suffering and in what ways the association could assist or support them. But we were also a little bit mindful of the mental health piece, because there's been a lot of pressure and a lot of tension when you can't go to work. Your revenue's dried up in a heartbeat. There's no money coming in, and there's still responsibilities going out the other end. And then as time's gone on and we've moved through the alert levels, it's getting information to them about coming back to work, about social distancing or physical distancing, about registers for contact tracing, about hygiene and cleanliness, and making that stuff available. But there's some real tensions if you've got, 6 guys working on a site, but they can't travel in a vehicle together. So instead of having 6 guys in a Mazda Bongo, there's 6 different vehicles going to site. There are real implications around efficiencies and productivity in that space. And of course, there's efficiency issues when you can't work within 2 metres of somebody you're working with. So, if you're required to hold up a piece of wood, which is 1.8 metres long, and you're 2 metres apart, it's not going to work. So they've had to overcome a number of issues to keep the show on the road, to be fair. From our own point of view, we've used Zoom a lot, and we've had weekly board meetings. I wouldn't call them board meetings really, but we probably spent 2 hours a week on a Zoom meeting with the board, just making sure that we were over the top of the issue of the day and as a board giving support to our team.
Yeah, that's
So it's been good fun.
That information going out, Ross, just to add to that, we had that pastoral care piece where the regional managers were ringing everybody up, but we had a huge amount of membership inquiries over this period of time. So it goes to show the importance an industry association has in the hardest of times. But we were sending comms out to around about 1,100 members, and we were getting around about 5,500 opens, and the click rate was huge.
Very strong.
Knowing that the information that we were sending out was actually incredibly valuable and referred to quite a number of times. So I don't know, Tony, did you find that with the comms you had going out? I'm lucky enough to be on your mailing list, so I could see it as well. So what was your feedback from the members on that?
Yeah, look, it's been really, really good, Bernie. It's I think, you know, as I mentioned at our conference, you know, back in Hong Kong, I think, you know, the electrical contracting industry is one big family, you know, and it's very, very small. Whether you talk about, you know, New Zealand and Australia, you know, communication is the key to any successful relationship. And I think Malcolm and his team, in particular, have done an outstanding job communicating with our membership. They've responded. You know, we're in a business environment basically fueled by fear at the moment, where, you know, everyone's on oxygen, and you know, we're lucky we've been able to work along and continue with good business practices, which will basically stay up everyone's business, you know, moving forward. But you know, it's just so important for the association to continue to communicate, and let business owners, small or large, know that you know, if something goes wrong, we're here to help them.
Bernie, can I chop in there and just remind the panelists to click on their chat tab as well? There's a range of questions and comments from the attendees coming in, but in addition, I've also got a couple of questions coming in on the Q&A line, and I'm worried we won't get through them all, actually. So do you mind if I just jump into some of these questions while we check the chat ones? So there's a question from Adam around New South Wales. What's the most important advice you have for small business and where we should be looking for work in the next 6 months? And I might throw this one at John, where it's about looking for work in unusual places. What have you done there, John, and how could you give advice to Adam there?
Well, what I did there, I did create a big war room, to be honest. My whole boardroom is a big white marker up there, and I got my leadership team in there and spent 2 to 3 days on a war room. So a bit like Sun Tzu, to be honest. That's what I felt like. Now, I went through every industry out there, and we've got target market 1, target market 2, target market 3, and we looked at who was affected, who isn't affected. Simple ones like boat builders, seafood industry, they absolutely weren't affected at all. They, in fact, booming because there's nothing else to do on the weekends. You couldn't play sports, so everybody went fishing. They're having the biggest boom of their lives. But then you've got industries like gyms, and gyms are back open now, but oh my God, there's no one there. I am really, really worried about gyms because people have bought their own stuff, and they're working from home, and they don't want to get back in there. I'm seeing restaurants full, actually. The restaurants are coming back, but I still don't know how many restaurants are going to be able to can operate with still only 20 people or 40 people in there, so that's hurting. But it was very interesting, and Alistair, you just said it before. I agree. I'm going to halve the amount of travel that I'm going to do moving forward, and all my staff that fly around the place, probably less than half, probably a third. And I thought of the planes, but I never realised the accommodation. They are really, really going to get hurt. So that just reminds me, I just want to sell some shares in a few companies. I'm going to take that down. But yeah, so my advice is sit down, go through it, have a real look and think outside the square, get it up there and have your target 1, 2, and 3. Start communicating to those companies that aren't affected and what value add, what services can help them save money. Yeah. Have a look at what the government grants are out there, what's targeting, if there's new home grants, the renovation grants. How can you be the expert in your field to make sure that the customers are choosing you over your competitors? Yep.
Got another question here from Maureen, and I might even throw this one to Alistair. although it's, I believe from January to March 2021 will be crunch time. The incentives will be gone, bills will be building up, and it'll be very tough. What's the strategy we should employ planning into next year on how we actually approach the tapering off of all the current government incentives?
That's the thing. Everyone's going to have to be watching their wallets and their spending going forward. And as I said before, some industries are going to be affected worse than others, and likewise, some families are going to be affected worse than others. And even though our restaurants and bars are open here in New Zealand, we're still not seeing the same amount of people that are in there. They're watching their pennies. They don't know what's around the corner. And my suggestion is that you sit down and write a budget. If you feel you're going to be severely affected or impacted by it financially, then we're just going to need to look forward and tighten the belt and look out for discretionary spending, etc. would be my advice.
Excellent. I got a question around apprentices, and I might answer part of it myself before throwing to you, Ross. From Leanne, my partner's a small contracting business with a third-year female apprentice. What is Master Electrician's position on lobbying government to subsidise and incentivise business to support the continued employment of apprentices post-September? So just for your knowledge, Master Electricians Australia has lobbied the government part of our 5-part stimulus plan to extend the 50% incentive for apprentices beyond for another 6 months, plus also put a re-employment incentive in there for any apprentices who've been displaced. So there's a cash bonus to the employer if they don't just go and find a new one, but if they re-employ an existing one. And maybe, Ross, before I go to you, I can just pick up on Bernie and what MENZ's doing in that space, what your current incentives are and what the future is looking like.
Was that for apprentices? Sorry, I cut out a bit there.
Yeah, sorry. We've currently got a 50% apprentice incentive till September, and then it runs out. And the concern from one of our members is when that runs out, what happens next? So we've actually formally asked the government to extend it a further 6 months, how important apprentices are, plus also asked for a re-employment incentive as well. So I'm not sure what current incentives you got now or whether they're going to drop off the cliff and what you're going to do about them going forward.
It pretty much exists at the moment with just the wage subsidy. There's big numbers being thrown out saying, you know, we're going to chuck $190 million at apprentices, but there hasn't really been any detail as to where or how that's going to be spent. I mean, they're certainly trying to look at keeping apprentices in employment just through the wage subsidy, but that's only going to last for so long. I think the next one probably runs out, I think it's 11 weeks from now. So after that, the problem is we're going to be hitting that block in the pipeline where the next jobs just may not hit the market. So it could be that the work just isn't there for those apprentices. We've got some group training schemes in New Zealand. We actually own one, the largest group training scheme in New Zealand, and there's some incentives being thrown their way to ensure that those apprentices, although if the work runs out for the host company, they get handed back to the group training scheme. The funds are there for the pure reason that they can keep their night school training and their off-job training going with a view to, and keep paying them so that when that workflow does come through, they can push them back into the market. There is a similar scheme for the electrical contractor who employs their own apprentice. So it's just a matter of how easy it is to access that funding.
And Ross, maybe if I can get your impression on that issue as well, but also another question from Paul in relation to the long-term impact on apprentice numbers, where we've seen in Australia the new apprentice numbers very closely follow the All Ords, and market confidence is down. We get a headache 4 years later. What's your impression of that issue, and how can we protect against that?
Well, it's a bit of a double whammy, Mel, because prior to COVID, we've had a government hell-bent on redesigning the architecture of our training scheme under the heading of the review of vocational education. and it's politicians going mad, really. Clearly, the minister's stopped taking his pills, and it's begun to flow on. We've had a very, very successful training system with the industry training organisation, and I think currently we've got about 5,500 electrical apprentices in training. And my fear with the review of vocational education and the transition from 11 healthy ITOs into one behemoth of an organisation, centrally managed, working at glacial pace, would be that potentially we're going to have an impediment to industry training. So that's been a concern. And then you pile COVID on top of that. And from our own group training scheme point of view, we've got 740 apprentices employed by our own company. You know, the notion of having a headline in the Auckland Herald that we've just made a bunch of those boys redundant just doesn't bear thinking about. And so the wage subsidy has been quite a valuable tool for the retention of those guys. And talking with the chair of ETCO a couple of weeks ago, and alluding to what Bernie spoke about, there's $19 million has been put towards group training schemes to help them retain apprentices. So that's a positive step, and hopefully ETCO will get the lion's share of that based on the size and scope of that training organisation. But in addition, yesterday the government announced a response to something that our organisation has been banging on government's door for a long time, that irrespective of what you do with training, the training spaces come from the employers. And if you're not talking to the employers, you won't have training spaces. And the government seems to have been happy to get their consultation process going with some individual in a laundromat in West Auckland. And that's just provided misinformation in my view. But they've just launched, I think the number is $391 million on the basis of a $16,000 contribution to an employer who takes on an employee. And of course that captures the apprentice space. It starts for the first time to have a significant motivation for an incentivisation to an employer to take on a trainee. And it'll be really interesting to see how that plays out. I mean, I think there are a number of companies, with or without COVID, who sit on the fringe of the training piece and go, it's too big a cost to me. And they don't view it as an investment. But with a $16,000 incentivisation to take on a trainee, I'm hoping that we'll get a reasonably consistent and large uptake. It would make pure sense to me, and we can build our training numbers.
Very good. Just plenty more questions here. If I can throw one at Tony, who's been a bit quiet for a few minutes. And the issue is about pricing from a prominent Queensland contractor, Tammy. And it's around we've seen some contractors use JobKeeper as a subsidy to go and win jobs under cost. How would you approach competition with someone like that?
Don't try and compete with them, and you never know when you're in that fight. You don't know who's undertaking those sort of tactics. But I would certainly warn anyone that's even thinking about doing something like that you are absolutely on a hiding to nothing, because you can have a project that drags out, JobKeeper stops, and all it does is the impact is greater. It just gets out of control. So, I would advise everyone, don't change your pricing strategy. We know margins are tight. The margins that you can actually make a job, either just pay an overhead recovery or make a small profit. I don't think there's any jobs out there at the moment with massive profitability. But whatever you do, do not do jobs under cost. It is just, you will eventually just disappear. Yeah, it's really disappointing. We've been a party to markets where we know that contractors are doing that sort of stuff, and you've got to let them go. it's a short-term solution for them to maybe keep some guys going with a bit of government support. But the scary thing is if they need that sort of support to keep their businesses running and to compete like that, they won't be around for long.
Yeah, we had exactly the same situation over here because there was a 12-week job wage subsidy, and those that were coming back to work after 6 weeks were rubbing their hands together going, hey, that's awesome, I've got another 6 weeks of subsidy coming in. But I think it just goes to show that sometimes, you know, electricians make good electricians but dumb businessmen, because they didn't realise that the invoicing they're going to do now isn't going to come through for another 6 weeks. So they're going to have another 6 weeks of just nothing there. So they're consuming that money that should have been there to buffer them. And it's just not there. So it's just, yeah, you're right. It's just dumb business sense. You can't compete with dumb.
Can't compete with dumb. I'll take
I'll be out of business soon anyway. So.
Can't compete with dumb. I like that one, Bernie. Hey, John, Jack from New South Wales is just asking around the current Australian and state government incentives that they've put on the table so far. How do you approach those stimulus packages strategically? What's in it for you, or how do you reshape your business to take advantage of that?
So in regards to the new home, I'm assuming that the new home grants, yeah, and the renovation grants. That's what I'm assuming. Is that how you say taking that, Mel?
Sorry, John. So he's just asking around the strategic plan for how to approach the federal government stimulus package. So how do you as a company deal with that stimulus? And I can see some risks and concerns in there. You could rely too heavily on it and reshape your business completely for new homes to take advantage of the home builder package, and then it just gets cut overnight in 6 months' time and your business is left up in the air. So yeah, it's probably how do you strategically approach these stimuluses for your best advantage? So
I've been in the solar industry for a long time, so I know all about stimulus packages and how quickly they can turn off the next day. I had 140 staff the day the government turned off the 44-cent feed-in tariff in Queensland, so I know what it's all like when those sort of things go down. So, but we always ran a business. We always have a SWOT analysis in place all the time, so we know that the biggest threat in your business is when they turn these things off. We also know that that the opportunities in your business is when they turn these things on. So the trick is, how do you leverage yourself that in a safe way, so if it does turn off, you know, you're going to be okay. So for me, you got to be able to be good at. You need to be able to be good at what you do. So don't do something that you're not good at, because at the end of the day, you're going to fail if you're not good at it. And you don't want to. Usually, the people that are really good at these things are going to take advantage of it first. So you need to look at what contracts you have in place with the builders. Do you work for a new builder? Because if you don't, what packages can you do that are better than the other guys that are doing that? However, we just know that in the building game, that builders are very loyal. Well, most of them are very loyal to the electricians, so they are pretty hard to get into. So unless you've got the relationships already, you need to start working on those relationships, or maybe look at the builders out there that don't have that are new that you can do an alliance with. That's what I'd be looking at. Those sort of things.
Alistair, you were talking about the office working from home before. I got a question from Chris here around whether this made you rethink what you need in terms of a business premises. I know you're a reasonably sized contractor, but maybe some of our smaller contractors out there who have a huge office and warehouse, do they need it? What's your impression of what's been learnt through COVID-19 and what we might do coming out of in terms of rental premises?
Obviously, people got fairly resilient over the lockdown period. There was obviously, basically overnight, we got shut down. We weren't allowed to go into the office. We had to mobilise and get everyone working from home. Now, that'll work fairly well. Obviously, the technology is available to do that fairly right. I guess from coming from Christchurch, from Canterbury, we were already used to that to some degree from the earthquakes we had some years ago. When the buildings sort of collapsed, we still managed to work from home, and I think it's seen quite a shift in the way that we do business. And a lot of companies are now, you know, they've got a warehouse there, a factory, and an office, reasonable office staff of 20 people. You know, might be paying 150,000 in building lease for the year. They're starting to wonder whether they actually do need all that space again. Bernie may be able to comment when I'm finished with the structure that we've actually got our ME head office at the moment, but I think you're going to find that, there's actually some government incentives over here now for people to actually get set up and work from home, and I think we're going to see a lot more of that. It's yet to be seen how productive they are. Many companies are saying that they actually got better productivity out of the flexibility. I know for a fact when I work from home, the fridge got a bit of hammering and put on an extra couple of kilos. So yeah, there's, I think it's definitely got its pluses. And Bernie, I don't know when you mentioned what
I just cut in there and say, you know, that really awkward moment between coffee and beer. That's what
well, at 8 o'clock in the morning.
It can blur sometimes.
Just get some New Zealand lamb in here, you'll be right.
Yeah, John, that was not the definition of stimulus package, I have to say.
Yeah, it's quite interesting that a lot of commercial industry is looking at effectively halving their office floor space. They're going to continue to work half and half from home. It just seems to be that there might be a lot of commercial space that becomes available in the cities, and that's really going to affect landlords. It's going to affect building owners. So that's going to be interesting how that works out. I guess in the interim, it's quite interesting that the government, we obviously from Wellington, where the capital is, the government has actually forced all of their workers back into the CBD. So that they can provide stimulus to the cafes and the businesses that are in the CBD. So the government's playing a little bit of a part into trying to keep things going. But my daughter works for a government department, and she went into work and she got told to go home because there were no desks. They'd all been taken home, so people could work from them. So there's a bit of at the moment, we're in a real sort of strange situation where, where everyone's heading back into their workplaces, but we just don't know how it's going to end up over the next few months.
I only got a question here from a bloke called Chris, you might know him, and he's just querying whether the bar's been set too high for building incentives in Australia. Most of the packages, I think the reno package is only for $150,000 renovation, but you have to earn less than $120,000 to get into it, so it's a pretty tight market. Do you think they've hit the market too high, or do you think that'll flow through the rest of the industry in other ways? Tony, you with us? Sorry.
still on mute, Tone.
Sorry, mate. Say that again.
Sorry, just a question from. You weren't doing emails, were you? God, no.
Had my girlfriend texting me.
That's much more important. Look, a question from a bloke named Chris. You might know him. Has the bar been set too high for building incentives in Australia? The reno package is obviously only over 150. Or do you think that's right and it'll flow through the rest of the industry? Or do you think the government should have actually brought in more tailored small packages like the one MEA's been promoting?
Yeah, definitely. I think the bar's been set way too high. You know, there's just such a small, it captures such a small amount of the market that can access that money. You know, I think when they first released that, I thought, oh, yeah, beauty, I'll look at doing a reno at home, you know. But, you know, we don't qualify in any way, shape or form. So, yeah, I think that the packages that they're letting go are so narrowly focused that, you know, it benefits just a few people, you know, and that in turn benefits just a few builders, just a few painters, just a few electricians, you know. So I think they need to do something maybe smaller and more broadly spread.
It does annoy me, those things, because they do bring it down. It's very hard for people to get it. And honestly, $150,000 renovation, that pretty much rules out every house in regional Queensland. Who does that when your house is only worth $300,000? Who's going to spend $150,000 on a reno? But it's funny how they all do these stimulus packages for apprentices and these things, and they always give it to people that can't afford it. I'm telling you, if they open it up to everybody, there would be a hell of a lot more apprentices getting put on today.
And how's that been in New Zealand, Ross? The stimulus packages that have been on offer so far, are they hitting the mark? Have we done much over there?
Well, there's been a couple of low interest or nil interest loans, and there was that package that I alluded to before of $10,000 a company and $1,800 per employee up to 50. So the application of those has really been around helping people deal with the fixed cost implications that they've had whilst not having any revenue, because the wage subsidy package has been entirely focused on retention of staff, really, and being able to deal with your staff with no revenue for a period of 12 weeks, and then a subsequent stimulus of a further 8 weeks around the wage subsidy. For some of the bigger companies, I think there's been some tax credits and tax breaks, but you've got to be about the size of Tony to be able to get any value out of that. So maybe you're on the wrong side of the ditch, Tony. We could have given you a New Zealand tax credit instead of a stimulus. But are they hitting the mark? I think they're certainly helping. They're certainly helping in terms of getting through the obligations of cost. But I think the risk will be over the next 2 or 3 months when some of those subsidies come off, particularly the wage subsidy. And I think some of the responsibility on our membership will be to ensure that any client that they are working for remains solvent. I think the current situation will be for many of the businesses, they've been acting like a form of our Ministry of Social Development and topping up wages from the wage subsidy. They've been writing checks every month to retain their staff on no revenue. And many won't have the reserves, they won't have the cash, may well be an overdraft, may well be bordering on insolvency. So there is a real risk for us going forward, I think, and we'll have to keep an eye on that.
Very good, Ross. There's, for everyone's knowledge in the chat, there's a lot of good information and comments from Janelle Miller. Janelle, I couldn't find a key question in all of that, although I do see a couple of members commenting around the fact that they've actually increased their prices during this time and seen no dip in work. And that probably reflects the higher cost of doing business at the moment. So I think that's to be commended, and everyone should take a leaf out of their books to ensure that you're still making money during this time if you are working. Now, we are getting very close to the end. We've only got 2 minutes to go. Bernie, can I call on you for a couple of closing comments before we wind up today and the future for New Zealand?
I think there's been some pretty good comments come through that essentially stick to your knitting, I think is a real critical thing. Don't try and do anything that's too out of the box. It's really just a case of consolidation and finding those efficiencies that are going to keep you going through. But you know, I think any time, nobody likes asking for help, but as a membership organisation, with the varying degrees of skill level that people have in running a business, if anyone gets into any sort of trouble, their first port of call should be, you know, ring your association, say what's happening, and then, you know, we've got all the resources that we can provide or direct you onto where you need to go. So get in touch with your association first and see what they can do for you in the first instance. But yeah, stick to your knitting, and I guess it's a case of just keep on rocking through.
Thanks, Bernie. So on that, I'd like to especially thank Alistair G, Ross Beal, John Horan, Tony Arnold, and yourself, Bernie McLaughlin. I think it's been a fascinating now, and I'm sure we'll have another crack at it in a few months' time as well. I'd love to have you guys on again as we're climbing out of this to look at the next phase. As in Australia, we're easing restrictions, trying to get back to some level of normality, but special thank you to all the attendees who came along and joined us today, and those who offered up questions and comments online. But our time's up, so I wanted to thank everybody and say farewell. Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care. Cheers.
Everyone.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Mel.